Well, Daniela Deutsch is going to be our moderator today, so let me give you a couple of points about her. I first met Daniela as she was talking or working up a program for National City and having students in the New School of Architecture redesign their downtown, which turned out to be an incredible master plan. So that's her claim to fame at the moment in San Diego. But she has a great background. She was educated at Darmstadt, Germany, multilingual. I forgot how many languages you speak, but a lot more than I do. She's taught in Germany and in the US, of course, and worked as a designer and held exhibitions in Germany and San Diego, and conducted research on scientific approach to design strategies. She's worked with Westfield Design, Carrier Johnson and Culture, and Badinger AE. She's a principal Exitexture Arch Lab in Germany, and her teaching experience is just as diverse as her professional activities. She's taught at multiple universities, included as an online studio at Boston Architecture College. And the NewSchool here, she serves as a fourth-year level coordinator, spearheading the academic part of an ambitious, integrated, and interdisciplinary collaboration. So Danielle is going to introduce the three architects in turn, and I think you'll enjoy this program. So welcome, Danielle.
Welcome everyone from my side as well to another Friends of San Diego Architecture panel discussions. This time celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage and the progress women have made in those 100 years. I mean, something that you all know, that it's a good moment to remember. 100 years ago, we didn't have a vote. And in the 1930s, women were not yet accepted in most architectural offices. So from this point of view, this is, I think, a great time to be a woman in architecture, but we have some things to do. So today we're trying to frame again the topic of being a woman in the architectural profession, some of its challenges, but definitely also advantages. I can tell you, in my experience as a woman in architecture was a very positive one, but I have my stories to tell. Just now it's your turn. And besides that important topic, we will focus also on two other important issues. The future of architecture in general, from point of view of research and innovation, both theoretical and professional. And I know you all three have thoughts about that. Keep in mind, we are a school of architecture, so we need to know what's in the future. But also the future of San Diego and how architecture can contribute to it. So those are kind of our main focuses today. We are very fortunate to have three women who will tell us about the paths they have chosen. We have three, at the moment, local practitioners, but these people have worked in different places and are coming from different places. What's interesting about them is that they have chosen very distinct and wonderfully different paths in the architectural profession. I know them all three for a variety of years, some for 15, some for 5, some for 1, but I feel like we're best friends. So for me, this is an amazing opportunity. Really quickly, we have Laura Shinn, the Director of Planning at San Diego State University, so pretty solid opportunity and responsibility. We have Jen, who I know for almost 15 years, Jen Landau. She's a local architect currently focusing on residential, multi-family, and small commercial projects. And we have Kristine. She's a kind of still new addition to San Diego, and one of my newest and best friends, architect, artist, experimental designer, professor, and recently the head of the Neuroscience of Architecture program at the NewSchool of Architecture and Design. One thing I can definitely assure you, these are three passionate, talented, and full of energy and inspiration ladies. So I'm going to start with Laura Shinn. Each of them will give you a quick kind of synopsis of their work.
Thank you. When I came out to San Diego to interview for my position, I had already done a couple of interviews, and I was told by one of the headhunters that worked with me on another position that didn't come through that you need to kind of come up with your story, that very quickly you can tell your story, like how did you get to where you are now, and then how does that relate obviously to the position. I think my story, when I talk to people, is one of increasing scale. I started out in a very traditional practice, ended up getting intrigued and interested for a variety of reasons with the larger scale, more community planning, and then ended up as a campus planner, and then ended up as a director of planning. So planning a campus, which is a lot like a small city. So these first images are really from my traditional practice, you might call it that, although it was even then not completely traditional. I had initially started out thinking I was interested in historic preservation, and although I continue to have that interest in the back of my mind as I moved through my career, I kind of veered a little bit away from that, but ended up in school realizing I really enjoyed design. So I decided to go ahead and get an architecture degree and pursue the profession of architecture. However, my first job, and the image on the left is the Springer Building. It's a 1928 building in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My first architecture job, they found out I was interested in historic preservation and history, and they said, hey, we have this client who wants to get historic tax credits on this 1928 building. So literally, I was fresh out of school, and my job was to make sure that this really important client got his tax credits, and then worked on the building, the design of the building. So that kind of started out my trajectory. When I decided to move to Ohio to attend the Ohio State University for my graduate work in architecture, during my in-between year, in between my 2 years of architecture, I worked for a small community and did design guidelines as a sort of a freelance job, and met an architect who was with one of the prominent firms in town, and then he offered me a job the following fall, and I said, well, I don't really want to go to school and work. That was my whole plan, was to save money and not have to do that, but I knew it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And as a result of joining that firm, Scully Caldwell, I was able to work on the Ohio State House, which is the image on the right. That is actually from the 1901 Annex building. And I spent the better part of a summer doing a lot of inventorying and careful recording of existing conditions on the building, designing things, really small-scale things like judicial benches that had disappeared over time, and details so that we could use the same painted ceiling motif but use it as an air return grill. And then I also, as part of that career, got to work on a book for the state of Ohio when ADA came out in 1992. They had done an earlier book the firm had, and I, because I had some writing skills, they said, hey, why don't you work on this? So I did all the photography, all the illustration, and all the rewrite, and I became an expert in ADA and accessible design. And those two themes you'll see continued throughout my career. Next, I went to work for a small community design center in Columbus that worked in central city neighborhoods. Again, a combination of preservation and economic development. This is what really got me intrigued with the idea of larger scale planning. These were underserved neighborhoods, and there were grants that were available both for community planning as well as storefront improvements in those neighborhoods. And that was a really interesting position. I learned a lot about working with the government, working with the city, working under the constraints of grants and that sort of thing. And again, that would come to prove useful later on in my career. I moved then to the Ohio State University, where I started as a campus planner in 1998. I did a lot of work at Ohio State, everything from campus master planning to a renovation of the Oval, which sounds like a really simple project, but given the iconography of that space, it was a very political project. Worked on a lot of building projects like the renovation and addition to the library, which went through a lot of controversy, but ended up being a really great addition and was actually able to pull the main circulation spine through the building. It referenced the history on one side, the Newark campus on the other side. There were a lot of things going on there that were beyond the building. So this idea that buildings are not just about themselves, but are about how they reach out and grab the community or grab the campus, interact with the campus, was really important in my career there, and a kind of an extension of what I did at the Design Center on a small scale. And then right before I left Ohio State, I had the fun job of being on the group that helped with the removal of a Lowhead Dam. So I was started to get really involved in environmental. Didn't know that was going to be preparation for working with CEQA, but it was. It was actually really good preparation. And I think talking about the details of this process and working with the Ohio EPA, the US EPA, the city, the county, the state, ODOT, which is like the Caltrans of Ohio, I think that's what got me the job here at San Diego State, because I had no experience with CEQA, but they realized she's done this in a different context and she knows how to work with these constituents. So that was a really exciting project. The dam actually was taken down before I left, and I got to see the first phases of the renovation of the river. So that was a really good moment, and as I said, prepared me for what I'm doing today at San Diego State. I do a lot of planning, master planning. I do a lot of CEQA work. One of the things that the upper image is the engineering and interdisciplinary sciences building, and one of the things I really try to do, continue to do, that I did a lot at Ohio State, is try to think about where is the building in the campus, how does it connect to the campus, and if any of you have seen this building is an extension of both the architecture, but more importantly of the planning and the paths through campus, and that idea that you have a different journey and you can filter through the campus in different ways. That was really important in designing this building. Fortunately, we had a president that actually cared about things like quadrangles and planning and architecture at the time, so we had a very supportive leadership on this. And this also was one of the fastest buildings. I think it was 39 months from beginning to being constructed, which is warp speed for an institution. So I learned a lot about the design-build process and about how you actually can do buildings quickly in a government setting. And then the bottom is just another kind of example of the things that are important to me as a planner, the idea of identity, the idea of creating a sense of place, a sense of community welcome and arrival. That's the gateway structure at Campanile. And that was also a lot of working with the city and working with different agencies and community groups. It's a different context out here in California, but there's also a lot of similarities in how things work. And then finally, I just had some extracurricular activities all the way through my career. I did a lot of work either as volunteer or as side jobs, where I did a lot of illustration work, and a lot of it related to historic things like historic house tours and historic design guidelines. There's probably 6 or 7 design guidelines that I've either completely done or done the illustrations for. These are for the Historic Resources Commission in Columbus, Ohio. So I think the common themes are, let's see, accessibility, history, or respecting the historic context, the idea of a larger scale, a larger interaction of architecture, and then also just institutions, working with a lot of different institutions, which we all have to do because our buildings aren't built in isolation. Thank you.
So next is Jen Landau, and do you want to talk a little bit about that work before we start on a discussion?
Good morning. Sorry. I'm not used to microphones. Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to Catherine and the Foundation for putting such a great event together. It's a wonderful forum to represent women. I will backtrack before I start talking about this. I think this is my last slide, actually, but that's okay. I don't know if you know. Okay. Okay, so I am not one of those people that started out knowing that I wanted to be an architect from the beginning. I always was pulled into the arts and engineering. I come from a medical and engineering parents. So I once heard somebody say, you take a job, you pick a career, but a passion chooses you. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what this is for me. I also heard someone say, if you can do anything else, do it. So here I am, right? So I started in undergrad as a bio major, thinking I was going to go into pre-med. So my passions were always quite diverse. And I ended up falling in love with theater. Not acting, obviously, but set design. And I ended up working at the La Jolla Playhouse through my undergrad. And it was an amazing experience. I got to work on some shows that went to Broadway. And there's a lot of correlation between theater, I think, set design, and architecture, but I didn't know it at the time. So I studied set design. I switched majors second year. So I have a degree in set design, which, what can you do with that, right? And then I also studied European history. So I kind of always skirted around architecture until grad school. I went to UCLA to study architecture and urban design. I got to work with some amazing people there. My thesis project was under Tom Main, who I know some of you must follow his work. And I got to work on some incredible projects, large-scale urban design projects. Later in my career, once I moved back to San Diego, I got to work at Carrier Johnson. I met Daniela and some other wonderful people, including my business partner, Corinne. I also started teaching here and at NewSchool, or at Woodbury, I'm sorry. And I did the urban design studio there, and I followed a similar path as my thesis project, which is very research-based, very contextual, and it's kind of the way I approach even single-family design, residential design is I like to do a heavy research. And I always find that in order to trust your intuition, you have to have it based on research and knowledge, and only then can you react to things intuitively. So I'll show you guys an example of one of those projects, but this is more of my recent work, and I'll spare you some of my early work. But this is a project that's under construction right now over in Mission Hills, and this is with my partner, Corinne. And it's 5 condo luxury units in a very, very tight site. So this is, I think, if I remember correctly, it's about 40-foot wide lot. So it's quite the challenge to get the parking and the unit layouts to work out. So interesting project. At the bottom, you can see the sort of the schematic where it was. The top images are where it's at today after, well, not today it's constructed, but the design, the goal after many months of value engineering. So that one, this is some of the top of a little bit earlier work. This is a project I worked on while I was at Carrier Johnson, and it's the part of City College. And back when this happened, it was the first project that was off their campus and into the East Village. So one of the big challenges was, how do we take the aesthetic of the college, which was a lot of brick and sort of 60s, some 60s mid-century buildings, and marry that to sort of the warehousing district of the East Village. So this project conceptually became this kind of hinge between the two worlds, and that's kind of what is happening in that building, where this cube that becomes this very high-tech world clashes into the brick facade, and the stair tower became the hinge in some way. There were multiple programs in there. I think it was cosmetology, nursing, and photography. So 3 very distinct programs in one building. And part of the way we brought those 3 together is created these lounges at every level, and the stair tower became, again, the hinge that connected all of those programs together. So that was sort of my first real project from beginning to end, where I was involved from everything from that original concept sketches to detailing. There's some really cool lights at the bottom that bring you around that corner, down to the way this bench cantilevers off that. So that kind of scale. And then some of our early work as L2 architects. On the bottom here, this is a 1960s, I believe, building in downtown Vista. And it belonged to the city of Vista. It was sold to a developer. a young developer who was just getting started, so we got to work with him to revitalize the building. And the goal was he was going to rent it out, and the tenants loved it so much they ended up purchasing it. So that was fun. But one of the challenges there was working with a young developer who was inexperienced and actually wanted to take away all of the beautiful brickwork in the 60s. And we, again, convinced him of the importance of leaving that. And at this point, there's a lot of ivy growing on there and emphasizing the facade even better. And then moving on to some of my residential work, these were mostly interior. These two projects were mostly interior projects. The one on top is the 1960s ranch over in La Jolla. It's on Skylark Avenue, which has almost a 180-degree view of the ocean and the Pacific beach below it. So interesting project trying to marry the 1960s ranch style with some very contemporary clients and opening it up. So that we ended up moving the kitchen to what used to be a covered patio. So relocating the way this all flowed to maximize the views and tying it with the exterior. And the bottom project is historic 1800s, 1880s cottage in Escondido. And that one was very interesting as well because it was historic. There was very little we could do to the exterior other than maintain it. So it presented some challenges. There were 130 years worth of additions and remodels done to it. So we ended up taking some things out that were added and opening up walls and finding walls and doorways and things there. So it's funny when something is so old that the additions are historic as well. So you can see these got a little whitewashed, but we just, the interiors obviously were not historic, so we did very casual cottage feel to kind of marry the way we live today in what was one of the original 2-bedroom cottage spaces is the new kitchen. Okay, and this is the last project, and I'll show you the final pictures, but coming back to my comments about basing things on a lot of research, this is a little project in Pacific Beach. It was a 1930s 2-bedroom cottage, and the left image is at the left. The left image is the original house, and it's on a very narrow, well not narrow, it's about 50 feet wide, but very narrow, skinny lot, 125 feet long. And this is back in an area that, through my research, and I might have bored the homeowners with this, but I love it. This is back where the trolley used to run, thank you, the streetcars, thank you. So this narrow lot, long driveway, there's an alley in the back. Garage doesn't take a precedence on the facade of the building. And with that research, we came up with multiple floor plans that were conscious of that, of allowing the house to maintain its front facade and really focus on doing an addition. So you can see the image in the middle is what we ended up with. And the far right is a sketch, an early sketch of multiple iterations of how we got there. But how do you we almost doubled the square footage on this guy. So how do you take a little bungalow and get to about 2,000 square foot home? And it was Spanish. The upper image on the right is an old render, but it didn't end up with the horizontal target test. But it ended up with more of the Spanish feel. And we really looked at this idea of a courtyard being a unifying factor. There's a tiny diagram, I don't know if you can see it, on the bottom of the sketch. It's blue and has an arrow. This one here. We had a series of these diagrams that were highlighting public versus private spaces in the home. And this is the one we ended up with, where it started out with the private spaces in the back of the home, public is the blue, and how we evolved into this idea of the public spaces wrapping around this courtyard. So I'll show you some final photos of that space. So again, the little house in the front and how it starts to open up. So you come into 8-foot ceilings in the new foyer, and you walk in, and we were able to elevate those original ceilings to the original gable, and that's where the kitchen is now towards the back. Maintaining the existing living room ceilings that were these beautiful code ceilings. So again, marrying that original 1930s home with a sort of beachy contemporary style, but being aware of the history of the place, and knowing what to keep and not to keep based on that knowledge. So that's where I'm at today. It's bench. My passion is lies in the residential New Orleans workers with residential clients. So that's sort of where I am today. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. And thank you, Daniela, for inviting me, and thank you for Friends of San Diego for allowing me to speak today. As Daniela said, I am a researcher and I'm an academic and a practitioner. But the practice that I do is a little bit off normal, so the work is not commonly built. So I wanted to begin with where I studied, and like Jennifer, I think how I came into architecture, I was first a dancer, and I knew as a dancer that when you're a dancer, your body, you are aware of your body, you're aware of your body in relation to space and with others. And when I started architecture, I studied at Arizona State University. I grew up in Arizona. And I knew with architecture, it was, like Jennifer said, it was about the same kind of investigations of how we choreograph bodies in space. And from then, from ASU, I selected 2 schools that I wanted to go to. Like NewSchool, it's a very small-scale school, Cranbrook Academy of Art and Architectural Association in London. And these 2 schools are phenomenal for their attitude towards making. And I call it craft architecture associations. And as we know, at Cranbrook Academy of Art, we have Charles and Ray Eames, the infamous couple from Cranbrook, as well as Zaha Hadid at the Architectural Associations, who's made enormous contributions to our field in design from a woman's perspective. So I don't want to undermine that. And with my work, I have to admit, I'm sorry I did more than 5 slides, because my work is so diverse and ranged that it's a bit hard to put it into a few images, but I'm going to quickly go through this as fast as I can since I have a few minutes. So while I was at Architectural Association and the last 20 years I've been teaching the ideas of complex geometry, formal articulations, how we design different kinds of environments where our body is actually engaging with these things. And looking at some of the works that we did at the AA, and some of the works that I did with my students at U of M or University of Minnesota or USC, we're looking at technologies that are inherently looking at dynamic forces in our environment that we engage with. So how do form engage throughout the city, engage our bodies, and how do we actually interact with our environments? Or what's on the right is what we call the self-regulating rose window, where passive energy, 2 layers of geometry, where the back layer is a thermochromatic resin that changes from black to white based on heat. And if the heat comes through the window, we can self-regulate with automation these cellular shutters that close and open and let it regulate the interior space. With these kinds of technologies, we can take it into a bigger, so those were my students' work, and this is some work that I do with my practice. We can take these ideas of technology that are embedded with the ideas of sustainability, complex geometry, and in some ways attributing to aesthetics and how technology and aesthetics can come together. So this one here is the ferry terminal in Taiwan, and we use the forms of push and pull, reflecting the mountains around Taiwan to address the ferry terminal. But what's interesting is that the mesh is on the second level, it's both an interior and exterior space where the fitted glass and the mesh environment shades, as well as allow the air to go through to cool the space in a very humid environment of Taiwan. Or this bridge is a 700-meter foot and car bridge in Potenza, Italy, where this is a lake that's a natural reserve lake. And we wanted to be very delicate with the nature, and like mosquitoes touching on water, how we can take the geometry and continuous geometry of waveforms and create these undulations as one passes through the 700 meters of space. Depending on if you're at the speed of the car or speed of a pedestrian, you can look through the perforated panels, which they are PV panels that will eventually light up the bridge at night. What it does is it gives you different kind of observations to the lake and the environment as you go through. And working with different speeds of the body and how we engage very specifically to how our body is perceiving the environment is what I'm interested in. So with that, if we can think about so as Daniela said, I'm leading the Neuroscience for Architecture program here, and knowing that in science, and we intuitively as architects know that our bodies and our environment are tightly interwoven, science is proving that even more. Can we create an environment where sound was used historically were in churches, where these sacred spaces resonate this incredible sound to make us feel calm? Can we use new technologies that can create these kind of sonic environments where in our space we can be outfitted with heart rate variability or brainwave devices that can sort of measure a relationship with the environment that's around us? So just recently, and I'll go very fast, I recently received the SOM Foundation Research Prize, and the conversation that I wanted to raise is how do we humanize high density when urban spaces are our focus today? So with this idea of neuroscience, I'm going to go fast, I take the hypothesis, and as a researcher, I ask specific questions. What of our environment is creating pressures around us? What is giving us joy, or how is it affecting our emotions? Then can we measure with VR technologies, with devices that measure our body sensors, like your Fitbit? Can we measure through space those environments that trigger our bodies in certain ways? And can we connect the geolocations of the city with our body rhythms to really objectively and scientifically try to measure what's really happening in our environment? And finally, I end with this because we wanted to talk. While I'm very much interested in technology, I do not. I feel that we need to actually expand cross time and cross technologies. And if I could just say technology, if you break up the word technology, it's techne logos, which is the logic of making. So we work with technologies. We can go back to ancient history to look at the technologies of the past and see how they lived well. I took a group of students in 2015 to Ladakh, which is in the northwestern part of the Himalayas. And we were invited by the king. You can see right here. This is a group of us here, and the king is right here. And this is his palace in Stoke Village, which is about 20 minutes away from Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh. This is the capital, this is the palace of Leh, and what's happening below are these modern technologies, concrete buildings that are being erected, and not very well either. And the king was very concerned. What is happening to our environment when our palace of 500 years ago is still standing up, and with the climate change and the flood that is happening in this northern part of the region, it's creating an environment like this where bad constructions of concrete is destroyed almost quickly. The flood is causing the water problems in Ladakh. He asks what's happening because he says, in Ladakh, prior to all this modernization, there was no such thing as arthritis because the houses were built with nature in mind. It wasn't foreign materials; it could breathe, and in an environment where people lived heterogeneously and interdependently with one another, with nature, with each other and age groups that collaborate together, I want to talk about how we can come back to nature and talking about the idea of femininity, that we need a new model of collaboration that, which I feel is in some ways a feminine spirit, and we know that's biologically as well, and I can explain later, but that we can actually, we can learn from the ancient civilizations how they lived together with nature, together with each other, and it's this interdependency of structures that actually provide the best future, that we can bring technology and nature together in one. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura, Jen, and Chris. Did I promise you wonderfully different interviews? Really impressive. I think it was worth it to take a bit of time on that because this is fantastic stuff. And I'm really honored to talk to you today even more. So we're going to start the conversation. I'm going to make a little bit of light if that's okay. The lighting here is not amazing, so I have two options. Either we go another track there, or we go this. The big one? The big one? Okay. So you can really see us. Thank you. No, I just don't know how people deal with lighting. So we're going to start. We start the conversation at least, and we'll see how far we go. As I told you, we're trying to frame three topics: women in architecture, the future of architecture, and San Diego architecture. And we have the right women for all three of these. So starting with the first question, it's again, the topic of women in architecture is immense, but there are a few basic issues, and I'm going to frame them all immediately. Like, why is architecture still predominantly a men-run field? We have as many women as men in architecture, but in terms of leadership, the percentages are very, very different. Things like equity by design, licensure processes. What about caregiving? All of these that women deal with and try to balance. I'm going to give it first to Laura. I have an order I'm going to keep. I know she has some anecdotes she likes to tell us related to similar issues, not just about women, but about diversity in architecture.
Okay, well, I'll start out by saying that I think that that is the conundrum and the $10,000 question is why do we have, when I was in school, and that was a long time ago, I'm not going to tell you how long ago, but it's a long time ago, we had 50% women at University of Virginia. In fact, I think we had 51% actually at one point. My husband and I went to University of Virginia together, but for our undergrad. But a lot of those women didn't end up going into architecture for a variety of reasons. That happened to be a 4-2 program. I also think that the architecture education is actually a really good education for a lot of other professions. It's really about problem solving, and it's about using creativity. It's taken a while, but the rest of the world is now trying to mimic us. I remember having a conversation when we were designing the engineering building. The engineering dean came to me and said, we have this really great class, and we need to design a classroom for it. We have the students, and they design a product for like the first semester, and then the second semester they actually build it. And I said, Monty, that's architecture school. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. So, I like to tease him about stealing the idea from the architects. But I think the point is that, there's a few ideas that I have. I mean, we all talk about, I don't have kids, but I know an awful lot of women in the profession do. So that balancing of the caregiving, whether it's a child or whether it's elderly parents or, whether it is just whatever you call a family, you're taking care of people that you love and care for, and that tends to fall a lot on women. I do have some examples from my career of men who actually took that on. Interestingly enough, and this isn't the anecdote you were expecting, but I do have another one. When I was at school at Caldwell, there was a gentleman whose wife made more money than he did. She was in mortgage banking at a time when that was a good career to be in. And he actually wanted to go work part-time because they had a kid. And he said, it makes sense for me to be the one that stays home and does the caregiving. That firm was not structured to support that. I mean, that's really, really sad. I know they are now because I know they have more women in leadership now. And I didn't even think about it at the time because the last thing on my mind was having kids. I was just trying to get my career started. But, in retrospect, had I decided to have children, would I have been able to successfully stay there? So I think that's one issue. Now, that is changing. I think more men are becoming more involved in parenting. I also think we have different definitions of family where there's not always a female mom that's available to do the parenting, so someone has to do it. So I think, there are different, I think that's all helpful. And I really don't know what the magic kind of, magic sauce to get more women from the schools into the profession. But I think it's important to do it because I think that, and it's diversity of all kinds. I mean, it's not just women. Our profession is shamefully not very diverse. Another anecdote I like to tell is my husband and I had to do an interview with a gentleman who was a quadriplegic. I happened to be on the board of a group home. It was not really a group home, it was actually a foundation that provided housing for people with disabilities, quadriplegics and paraplegics. And one of his goals as part of his rehab program was to look at other professions, and he was very interested in design. He was interested in architecture or engineering. And he asked us the question, something on the effect of, why should I go into architecture? I'm in a wheelchair, I can't go on construction sites. I said, why not? I said, our profession needs you. I said, we don't design. Clearly, we have laws that are making us make the world more accessible because we haven't done it right. So we need people in wheelchairs to help us figure that out. And so, whatever that element of diversity is, I think it's really, really, really important. And I wish I had a really good answer as to how we can get more women. I think supporting all of the roles that women take on would be really important, but that's also going to help everyone.
It's a really good piece of the answer, and that's why we get together as a team. I think that's maybe one of the solutions. We need to see what actions can we take as a team to push this forward. Jen? And again, these are many parts of this question. I know you are a mom, you have 2 girls, but you can talk about your perspective as a woman in architecture from all directions, as a mom or just simply as a woman.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think my class was maybe about a third women. And as Laura said, I think a lot of women did not end up going into architecture. And it's interesting, maybe I think men, maybe like a similar male-dominated field, for instance, I just watched a woman, mother and daughter were both airplane pilots. And they were talking about, it was super fascinating, talking about the hurdles for them to become pilots and all the jokes they hear about bad parking. So I think there's obviously a resilience that you have to have as a woman in a male-dominated field and how you handle all of those situations. But as far as why, if I maybe be a little crass, I think women don't like to put up with the BS of a lot of the things that take place in firms and the bureaucracy and so sometimes it's easier to walk away from all of that than to hit it head on. For me personally, I do have kids. They're still little. I have twin girls who know how to use and know the difference between a flathead screwdriver and a Phillips, and they're almost 4. So. But for me, I had a difficult pregnancy. My second trimester was amazing. Kurt and I finished maybe a lot of projects during my second trimester. And then I was sick for a while, and my kids were premature, and there was 6 months that I think disappeared, and that turned into a year. So I can't imagine any firm putting up with that. So thankfully, my husband is incredibly supportive, and we're able to do this where I was not making a lot of money for many years, getting started in this field. But Kurt and I are very proud of the fact that we started our own women-owned firm, and Kurt has taught me a lot about that because in a way I was a little bit blinded. I never was one of the women who thought I wasn't as good as anyone else. In fact, I remember in school when you played sports and they said, well, if a girl scores, it's worth double. And I was like, well, why? I can do it just as well. I don't want the extra points. So I'm not your typical woman, but maybe the typical woman that goes into architecture. So when Corinne and I opened our business and we wanted to label it, and Corinne said, let's label it a women-owned firm. I said, why draw attention to it? A man wouldn't label their firm a male-owned firm. But through the years that I've worked with Corinne and experiencing things, started looking at things a little bit in a different way. And I don't know, I think that we, as women, we bring something different to the table. Obviously, that's the general statement, but I think the way that we handle problems, handle conflict it brings something. I've noticed if there's a group of men around a table trying to solve something, the minute a woman walks in, it sort of changes that dynamic, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm happy to share examples of that.
Thank you, Jen. See, you make me and Corinne cry because we know the whole story. But you guys are amazing. I mean, I look up to you, and thank you for sharing this story so openly. Please.
So I will begin by saying that Aldo van Eyck, a Dutch architect, created in the 50s housing for single mothers. And the housing for single mothers and the approach to his idea is that we need to design communities. And I think the idea that we together help each other and through collaborative spirit is the way we can bring the women's spirit forward. Biologically, we are very different. And if we understand that through neuroscience, our brain is connected to our body, the male body and the female body are different, that means we do think differently by nature. If we understand that all of our world up to now has been male-dominated thinking because the women's rights and women's voice were not yet accepted, except for since the 20th century. It's now with the 21st century, it's a time to shift this kind of thinking and where we can go forward. In academia, what's very interesting is all the Ivy League schools, Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, are employing women deans. Women leaders in academia are changing the platform of how we study, how we design, how we think through spaces. And what we could say that 20th century was very much, from the late 19th century to 20th century, very much about production, mass productions, and how we build our world and led to where we are now. What it was a competitive, capitalistic, competitive drive to achieve great advances, which we have. But I think the 21st century will start to be more of an emotional century where we actually accept who we are, accept our bodies, accept our differences. And I think what women do by nature is to embrace the differences and hopefully uplift everyone together.
It's really beautiful. And again, we are going towards an interdisciplinary world. And it's not that men are less important than women, but we need to balance it out and share the responsibility and the strengths. Yeah. So I guess with the second question, I will at this moment stay with you for a moment, Chris, because we have the future of architecture, and you are an innovator, you are a researcher, and I want to see your opinion on, what do you think about need-on innovation in architecture or interdisciplinary processes, and again, how we work together now in these very complex teams for like different animals, and
yeah, I think because I went to Cranbrook Academy of Art, which as a school was a very small school of 10 disciplines of art, one being architecture, but the fine arts and the craft, painting, sculpture, metal, ceramics, this kind of interdisciplinary thinking of how we design architecture was very embedded in my thinking. With technology, we could say that there's a difference between invention and innovation, and I think invention is a very hard one. Invention confronts us with something very new, and new is very difficult to accept. But innovation allows a continuity of progress, development, and transformations that we, with previous knowledge, can get better and better. So I think we need to walk this line of invention and innovation carefully and they have different time dimensions in some ways. When you invent too soon, like the architects of the 60s, I say the 60s visionary architects needed 60 years to come to the technology of today to start doing their work, because they were really thinking about a different kind of world then, that we could only with technology, of mobile technology and all of that work now. So technology, there's technology in architecture, for architecture, with architecture, and of architecture. And we need to look at technology in all these different dimensions of architecture with formalities, beauty, sociality, and economy.
To give this to Laura for a moment, again, you work in a university as well, and from a different perspective, but you work with researchers. How do you see innovation in architecture or future of architecture from a user perspective or anything related to planning?
Well, I mean, obviously one of the things that we're trying to do at San Diego State is really encourage that interdisciplinary. What we're confronting though, and I loved your distinction between invention and innovation, and how innovation seems a little more of an evolution and less of just a sudden change. Because change is hard, and institutions of higher education, surprisingly, the individuals are inventing and the individuals are being innovative, but for the institution, change is really hard. But this idea that we are trying to create spaces that will encourage people to come together that don't normally come together. And so that, from a planning and an architecture point of view, and in the past, at least at San Diego State, had a very sort of historic model. I don't think it has to be historic or historicist. I think it can be done in very contemporary looking environments. But I think that's where we get back to this idea of studying, because some of the so-called contemporary environments that we've created maybe in the 60s, for example, feel very cold to us today. So it's like, how do we get those new materials and those new technologies, but give them that human element? So I also love that your last slide was about going back to a really ancient society that's been doing things and living in a very, very ancient way for a long time. So I think that it's not an easy evolution. It's not an easy way to go. But I think finding that sweet spot between embracing the technology and making spaces and places where people come together and feel comfortable having divergent opinions, having heated, passionate discussions. And how do we do that in a way? And does it always have to be, we tend to go back to the historic because that's what's comfortable for us. We know, okay, we all like the streets of Paris, so let's make our streets look like Paris. That may not be appropriate always, but there's some element. So it's like, what is that element? How can we scientifically and with good data understand what are those elements and then test them? That's the other thing I love about technology is we can pre-test them. We can put somebody in a VR room and we can say, okay, is this enough trees? Is this, okay, that's too many trees because that's too many bushes, that's scary. Okay, what about this? We can literally walk them through an environment and get them to that sweet spot where they're comfortable.
Oh, that's wonderful. And by the way, Chris is just building, as we speak, neuroscience lab at NewSchool to literally test, measure those outcomes, and we're very excited to see what you're going to come up with. So Jen, what's your take on that? I know it can be innovation in general. You work with incredible architects studied at UCLA, but you also now, as far as I remember, discover another part of innovation, simply in planning housing or the way you deal with permits, or, what would you like to address in terms of new approaches in architecture to simplify the process or to enhance the process?
That's a great question, and I think yes, I think the universities tend to be the first place that innovation and new technologies can get implemented, and I think that's a wonderful thing about universities, where they can often have the budgets to test new technologies, new building systems, the best in the latest green, everything from exterior systems to heating and cooling. Unfortunately, still in the residential realm, it's sort of, I don't know how many years behind. Oftentimes we're lucky if someone knows how to read a floor plan in that world. Not the GCs, hopefully the GCs do, but the installers and such. So I tend to take a very educational approach to that and try to sort of bring everybody up with me, even to teaching them how to read a plan. But I think there's a struggle to take in those new technologies, and even not so new technologies. I'll give you a quick example. I love this example. I had a plumber argue with me that I couldn't do a roll-in shower, that he's been doing this for 40 years and he's never seen someone do that. Was I trying to flood this house? And I said, well, just because you do it for 40 years doesn't mean you've been doing it right.
Just a woman can say that.
Well, you smile and make it a joke. But
When that sexism, men can say it too.
yes, as long as you smile. But yeah, I do think there's significant change in the last 20 years. I think all of us are probably old enough to remember the first email address we had. Mine was in college, so I'm still of this generation that remembers pre-internet, and I think that change has been so drastic and in such a short amount of time that I think we have yet to see how that's going to impact our society further. Yeah, no, I love that. But yeah, just in short, I think that there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the schools, and part of some of the juries here on how all of this technology impacts the way we live, the way we use our vehicles, or look towards not using our vehicles, the way that changes the urban fabric, from transportation to green. What we see in housing is we're still building houses the same way that we built them for 100 years, just with less, sustainable materials. I mean, hopefully more, but, I deal with a lot of original redwood studs that are in perfect condition 100 years later. That doesn't happen with our current material. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of have housing meet the technology of today, and there's tons of systems out there that are just cost prohibitive still. So I think it's an exciting time. I think it can be scary for people, myself included. I often feel I have to ask, and I know my kids are going to teach me how to use certain things there already, but I think we have to. It's a part of our duty to
Just wait till they're 12. My son is 12 and he knows everything better than me.
But I'm sorry, I didn't address your question about planning. And,
Yes.
I think even just in the last 10 years, we've seen the city go from everything being on paper to a lot of bits going into digital formats, being able to pay online, to simple things like that. But specifically for housing, I think that one of the innovations there might be, this is just my opinion from an outsider, I've never worked at the city, maybe Mike can advise, is maybe separating the housing, residential world from city planning, giving them their own separate office so that we can take that and let the city approval process be for the larger scale projects and not burden them with the little guys that we bring in, because then it takes a month to review a little house. So that's maybe something to work on.
We're taking control. The residential is on us. Somebody has to.
That's
That's
what
a
I
very
would do.
good point.
So let's go with the flow now.
I wanted to respond about the reading of the drawing. So in terms of the advancement of technology, about 15 years ago when I was working in Europe, because of digital technology, 3D printing, and CNC, which is computer numerical controlled manufacturing, we can create forms that are much more complicated than panelizations that was the majority of the paradigm of mass production in the 20th century. So with this idea where computers can speak to machines that can build, some of my students are looking at how to create small-scale robots that deposit materials that together the robots can speak together and construct buildings. Now we know you can 3D print a house in a day. They did that in the Netherlands. They have done that in China. This is a research that's been going on for about a couple of decades, but the speed in which technology is changing is incredible. One of the things that I wanted to say regarding the drawing is that 15 years ago, working with some of the architects at Norman Foster's, who's looking at digital technology, transferring digital technology to the builder. We don't need to design drawings, we don't need to print drawings anymore. We can create rules of fabrication and building that the rule set can allow the builders to build, or as they were saying in Foster's, when you give a 3D file to a company or a builder and they translate and they spit out the actual object that they're going to build rather than a drawing, this one-to-one translation of a drawing that used to be a normal practice of architecture is not necessarily so anymore. And this new communication channel is going to be a very different world. And it is. And what it does is it actually brings more liability to the architects, because we have to be millimeter precise with our drawings. And if we were translating files, that precision is on us, whereas before it was verified in field.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating, and I'm always frustrated by the process that we go through, because I agree. We design something in 3D, we cut sections, we give somebody 2D and say, put it back together. Or we could just be like, here's the 3D. So it is frustrating, and I do think that, again, that world, there's much less BIM modeling in residential. It's almost like, I don't know, maybe 30 years behind what you see in larger scale. So it would be nice to find a way to start bringing in some of those systems into that residential world as well, and training people as you go.
Yes, very common. Thank you. So as a final topic, so Catherine, do we have, is there a limit of time that it could be made? Okay, so for a final topic, we want to talk a little bit about local issues and San Diego architecture. What do you think? It's the current state. What are possible obstacles? We know there are few just now working with 55 students on a housing project in Morena Boulevard, just observing the process. Lots of obstacles in doing what you really need for the city. And again, what do you think are strategies we can employ to change the current state, if you think we need any? Who wants to start? Let's go with the floor.
Okay, I'll start.
The new San Diego.
I am very new, so I don't know San Diego as much as you all do. But I have observed and know a little bit about the feeling of San Diego that I get. And what I love about San Diego is that the size is small enough to be a community, but large enough to be a city. And what San Diego has a place in the world is globally powerful with the science and engineering and the biotechnology that exists in this circle. So a lot of the venture capitalists who are investing in new technologies, San Diego is one of the top cities that they're investing in. With that in mind, we're both globally powerful and influential, at the same time very locally designing all these beautiful neighborhoods around San Diego that can continue to flourish their own culture and develop. Has a wonderful scale of livability that I think San Diego can provide. And it's this global-local relationship that I think it can be wonderful here.
Very well said.
Well, I'm also fairly new to San Diego. I've only been here 5 years, but I will say that it's a personal anecdote. When I first came out here, my bicycle came out with me as checked baggage. I'm a pretty serious cyclist. And I came out here and I said, this is great. I'm going to be able to ride all year round. This will be great. And then I started riding around and I realized that, the infrastructure really isn't there and people are not very friendly to bikes. And people in cars are sort of have this entitlement. And then I started looking at driver behavior and I went, what the heck do they teach people in driver's ed here? It must be different than what I took when I actually took it in Virginia. But anyway, so I kind of thought, okay, one of the things that I agree, there's a wonderful scale to San Diego. The neighborhoods, the downtown has this beautiful fine-grained scale to its blocks. I absolutely love walking. I walked over here from Seaport Village this morning, and it didn't feel that long because it's got this nice scale and a lot of activity and stuff going on. Realized it wasn't always that way, but it's getting better every day with more construction going in. But I think, so to me, a lot of it is about the connectivity because I think that we have these wonderful jewels of neighborhoods, but if you want to go outside of that neighborhood, and there's so much to do around here, we're such a big county, our county's like an eighth of the size of Ohio or something like that. We have 88 counties in Ohio, and San Diego County would be a number of those counties. So I think that we have to really think about the mobility and the connectivity of how we get around to those places. And, I'm listening sort of to the debate about the regional transportation plan and the big vision that Sandag has put out there, I'm regressing to Ohio, that Sandag has put out there. And I think, we're going to need big ideas like that. But there's so much resistance because everybody's worried about, oh my gosh, my road project is going to be left on the cutting room floor and they're going to just pay for transit. And, I realize we can't solve everything with transit, but we need to look at all of these different technologies of how we get around. Because that's really where San Diego kind of falls apart. I mean, we've got this wonderful weather, we've got this wonderful topography, this beautiful, beautiful environment, these incredible little jewels of neighborhoods that in and of themselves are walkable, but they're not particularly well connected. Some of the neatest places like North Park, South Park, not well connected by transit. So you still have to have a car to live there, and you shouldn't have to because, you've got all you need there. But if you need to get to your kid's school or where your kid is involved with soccer or in a play or something like that, it's really hard because we're not very well connected. And then thinking also about this idea of, this is probably a bigger social issue, but this idea of how we get our kids around. We've got to create a system that is safe so that children can start to maybe be a little more independent at an earlier age and can be safe in that environment. So that we don't necessarily, if we have that connected transit system, that's great, but it's got to be safe so that people will let their kids use it. I had a colleague who was really grilling me almost daily about my use of the trolley because she really wanted to get to a point where she could put her daughter on the trolley, but she had some concerns about it. And so, how do we make it something that everybody uses and enough people use that it is safe and then it frees up parents and frees up a lot of our time and works for everybody. Also works for elderly. I mean, we all know that we have a larger and larger elderly population, and at a certain point they won't be able to drive. So are they then going to be stuck where they are if they can't get around to make use of all the wonderful stuff we have in this county?
Very important point you're making. I was going to school alone since I was 6. I can't believe now, but I was in a different country.
So, please, you are our San Diego expert.
Well, I've been here considerably longer than some of the ladies here, but my experience, yes, I've lived in San Diego and I've lived in LA. I was actually born in South America and came here as a child. So I know, I think recently in the news there was a dad that got, in New York City, got in trouble for letting his 9-year-old ride the subway to school. And obviously I wasn't old enough to ride public transit on my own, but I do remember crossing, there were the tunnel that would go underneath the train track. And my mom would drop us off on one side, we would run across the bottom, and she would make sure we came out on the other end. And
She's here, by the way.
yes. So yeah, I think it's a little bit different. When we moved here, we were riding our bikes in the canyons, and it was a different time, and we waited till the lights came on the street to come home. I think parents are very nervous these days about the safety of their kids. So that's a great concern, but I do agree the way our city has grown so wrapped around the system. There's a lot of ideas that come in, and I think they're great ideas to test. But when we look at things like, hey, the transit system in New York City is amazing, let's implement that. We are not New York City. We're not a densely packed, high-rise city that it's so sprawled out. So what is the right answer? I don't know. But I think the transit. I think I was reading an article recently that said only 1.5% of all transit is through rail, and if their goal is to raise it to 10%. They can get 10% of transit to be on rail. They can not add 3 lanes to the freeway or some equation like that. So I think we definitely need to do more intensive research on that and how San Diego can grow as linked to the conversation about technology and the way people live. And now we have Uber and Lyft. I think a lot of people are able to get rid of their cars. And then some of, it changes the way parking is considered. And all of these things. But it's going to be like change, like we said, change is hard, and people are very emotionally attached to their cars.
Thank you, Jen. So I'd say this is a good moment to open it for discussion and questions. You can still keep telling your opinion in the process if you remember something. I know you talked about this subject for a while. But I like to conclude just that. Women are amazing. I think we are small but global. Santiago has incredible potential. And definitely we should get together, be more courageous. We have a lot of ideas and energy, as you can see. And we need to get out there as professors, as practitioners, as women. So please, anyone, any questions at this point? Okay, we have one here and then you.
Hello. We opened the discussion with a talk about why aren't there more women represented in the workplace, why aren't there more women architects, and then the flow of the conversation today became very focused on technology. So I'm wondering, do you think that innovations in technology are going to allow women to become more relevant and a higher percentage of architects in the field? Some of the challenges we talked about were women as caretakers, and does that conflict in any way with women being in the office? So how can technology help us overcome our lack of presence in the realm?
I'll start by answering that. I think this technology is one of the most powerful things that we have. And in terms of collaborations and integrations, that what can bring us to an equal plane amongst all of us is through our phone. And so it's quite a potentially a democratic device. I think the community aspect, the female aspect, the friendship aspect is pretty incredible here. Even this group is Friends of San Diego. And with that understanding, and since I came here in San Diego, Mike Stettner, who I call the father of San Diego, has welcomed me wonderfully as part of his family, and he has the true spirit of what it means to be a community. I think that when I believe the founder of Friends of San Diego was a woman, was challenging the conversation of architecture at that time, and were saying that the architect does not have the final say, but it is through a community conversation with the people and the architect together that builds a wonderful society. And I will also quote that there's a woman, Australian writer and feminist named Germaine Greer, and she says the opposite of fraternity is not maternity, but fraternity. So fraternity and brotherhood and sisterhood is the opposite of a paternal hierarchical model. And then if we go towards a more ecological, equal plane of collaboration rather than a top-down model, we can, with each other, with the brains that we have, work together. And I believe that trying to stand up for yourself and be the ego architect is by logic a poor, efficient model. That when we're collaborating, we can work less and win more by collaboration. And so the energy efficiency is better through collaboration than through the individual ego trip of the 20th century.
That's a hard one to call. I mean, just simplistically, I think technology has allowed us to get out of a lot of the office environments, but I definitely agree that architecture, if it's anything, it is a collaborative effort. And working on our own, we have this entire network of colleagues that we share knowledge with, and there's so much to know and so many niches that you can specialize in that, I think women are particularly good at having those networks where we can rely on each other. And I have a couple of friends who are also mothers running their own businesses, and we share ideas all the time, or we're almost desperate for each other's work. So I think that's really important, but it does allow us to get out of the office. And in my case with kids, that flexibility is invaluable. So, yeah.
I just was going to get an example, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, but I think it does bring up a potential model that we could look at. One of our former colleagues from Ohio started essentially a virtual practice. He is a project manager, and he works out of his basement, and he's semi-retired, and he essentially contracts, he gets jobs, and then contracts them out to a variety of folks all over the country, all over the world, and they all work virtually, and they collaborate virtually, and they use, all kinds of technology platforms to do that. Part of me, I like the human engagement, and I think you can't do 100% that, but I think that a model like that, because part of what I think discourages women from this profession is the idea that if you do take a few years off to care for an elderly parent, care for a child, whatever, you are kind of left behind, or you feel like you're left behind. And so these kinds of practices where you could literally be working at 3 in the morning in your jammies and no one would care. Heck, you could have a conference call, you just turn off your camera at 3 in the morning in your jammies and nobody would care because, so you can be productive when you have the time to be productive and you can manage your own time. Now, some people don't work well in that environment, so it's not going to work for everybody. But I think that that we need to start thinking about different models that combine, some combination of the traditional, let's get a bunch of people in a room and show the boards and have a big meeting and look at everyone's body language, which is important, with the technology that allows you to kind of do some of the background work whenever you want to and wherever you want to. So that flexibility is really important. I think that could be very supportive. I'm not sure that Pete McRae has the best model yet, but it was intriguing when he talked to me about it. I instantly thought, hey, wouldn't that be great for new mothers? They could work from home at 3 in the morning when their kid's awake and, they just need to be up or they can't sleep or whatever. So I thought there's some interesting ideas out there.
Yeah, to go along with that idea that, say, the digital technology is enabling new ways to cooperate, one of the things that struck me when Jen was talking about starting her own business with Corinne was that architecture is very scalable in that sense. You don't have to be Ford Motor Company to build a car the way an architect, you may have to have a large firm to build a giant project, but you can also have a small firm to build small projects. And in that sense, that traditional scalability is now being reinforced and a whole new level of ability to cooperate is being created. The other thought I had was specifically, Daniela, I'll put it to you, is that there's another example, fine example, 100-year-old example of interdisciplinary things, and also I think a gender-balanced example, which is the Bauhaus celebrating its 100th anniversary, and that was something that was specifically designed on the kind of the same model as Cranbrook, and that it was something that had I wouldn't call it necessarily that it was woke quite yet, but it was definitely something that integrated both male and female input into how the arts are going to be. They did have, I think, discrimination in the sense that women were shunted into the arty part and the men were doing the architecture part, but it was a stepping stone.
Thank you. Yes, I have studied in Germany, so I heard a lot about Bauhaus. But I'm originally from Romania, just so I haven't mentioned that. I lived in Germany for 10 years, and I have currently a firm in Frankfurt with my best friend, just like Corinne and Jen, just he's a male, so there you go. What I wanted to say is that I'm glad you brought this up. So I feel fortunate to have studied in Germany because there is a very strong sense of equality compared to other places I've been. Yeah, if the German women are strong women, you know that. I'm talking about the late, 60 years. And I came from Romania, very shy, in a very male-dominated country where women were just literally washing the floors. Obviously, we also studied. I'm not 100 years old, but but I was very surprised by the power of women, and I realized it's going back as an architect later on. So when I started studying, they were more women than men in the school. That's German school, typical. And again, impressively strong women and very talented and outspoken. But then I learned, as you said, that there is a history on that in Germany, starting with Bauhaus, yeah? And what I'm learning now is one of the people I look up that's maybe, I don't know, 15 years older than me, Annette Joachim. She's a famous woman, German architect in Frankfurt, where I have a small practice, and she's a professor. I'm looking at her, and she's now doing some of the most interdisciplinary approaches in Germany overall. Yeah, so in Germany there are the women that now again, the Bauhaus was different. They invited the women and developed this kind of culture. But now, as we speak, in the past 5 years, is the women that start the strongest and most successful interdisciplinary approaches, if this makes sense. So what I want to say with this is, as an academic myself, just like Chris, and I'm very happy that I studied there, and I'm very eager to bring some of these, I would say, culture from Germany of strong women and taking control and working interdisciplinary to my students here. And obviously I do the same with my male students, but I don't discriminate. On the same time, because I've been there 10 years in this culture, starting with Bauhaus, I feel like I can take control of the importance of that, yeah? I don't know if this makes sense. Is this another piece of your question that you wanted me to answer, or something like this? Yeah. Anyway,
I'd like to answer. I think the Bauhaus is an excellent example of how the bodies and performance and design, what they call the Gesamtkunstwerk, altogether art, was critical. The thing that's different than the Bauhaus, or the thing that I'd like to stress about the Bauhaus, is that they were very much interested in craft. They were interested not just in mass production. They looked at the technology of the day, but they were trying to elevate the technology and the craft of their work to a higher level of fine art. I think when technology, and small firms can do large projects. It's incredible with technology today that a 5-person or 2-person firm can actually, with collaborations and the kind of software that we have that goes between engineers and the smaller firms, can actually, with similar softwares, analyze large projects. But I think what's interesting that we need to take care of is when Laura was talking about bringing human back in. When technology is separated, when technology is so abstract, what the Bauhaus did so well then, and what has been done historically, was art was not separated from day-to-day life. The way we made things, crafting things, was art. It was not that we think and then we craft, somebody else crafted. So when the things that we make get separated further and further from our own hands, the object that we're faced with is less and less valuable in some ways. That we hold value to the act of crafting. And I believe that we have to bring the human craft back into and with technology to eliminate the abstraction of technology that is separated from human.
My question is about urbanization, in particular how it relates to technology today. We have the idea of the smart city. Yes, the idea of the smart city connecting human life to digital technology. Two things that are concerning us now in the United States are, one, violence in an urban environment, and two, drug consumption. So my question to architects is, are we looking more deeply into how the new landscape, including these technological devices, is going to impact human life concerning, violence and drug consumption in particular, but more generally psychiatric concerns. We saw that in the middle of the 20th century with the flight to the suburbs and psychiatry being a huge field mushroomed as a result of the new urban realities. So my question is, are architects looking more deeply into how the smart city is going to impact people psychologically?
Well, I think it's interesting that you're talking about the smart city and you're talking about things like kind of safety and crime and the sort of psychology of spaces. And I think that there are a lot of social science studies that have been done over time about what makes people feel comfortable in a space and what makes spaces safer. The idea of eyes on the street. I know that's a really old concept, but it's kind of true. The more people that are likely to observe an act, the less likely a bad act is to happen. And we have a really good example of that here in San Diego in the new plaza that was created near Horton Plaza, where, you know, because there's not a lot of active uses around there, there's not a lot of things that open up onto that space, it's become a bit of a place for homeless to hang out. And then people get nervous about going there, and so they don't. What I think is really interesting now is that we have a lot of research, and with this whole connection with architecture and urban design and kind of neuroscience, where we can really fine-tune what are the characteristics of the space. So it isn't this sort of anecdotal survey data about how people feel about a space or what would make somebody use a space, but we can actually look at what's happening in their brain and how that happens. I think that, you know, you've heard a lot of our argument about the reason that people are engaged in crime, or the reason people have psychological problems has to do with isolation. It has to do with lack of economic opportunity. I think those are not necessarily going to be solved by architects, but I think there is a role for technology in the city to help us identify some of those problem areas and encourage, instead of maybe discouraging bad behavior, encourage more good behavior that'll sort of push the bad behavior out, if you will. So the technology can help because it's another set of eyes on the street. It's not quite as powerful as having a human being observe your behavior. That's going to make you behave better than if you just know there's a camera observing your behavior. So again, I think it's a combination of those two. But
the benefits are still outweighing the costs.
So I just heard a debate between Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist, and Slavoj Žižek, cultural philosopher, and they were looking at the comparison between capitalism, communism, and happiness. And Slavoj Žižek said, China. Just one word. And how is it that China can, as a society, lift 600 million people out of poverty? And when you ask the Chinese population, they're generally happy because they feel that the government is taking care of them. Although they're a communist country and they are mobilized entirely as a whole group, because of that collaboration and mobility as a group, they can advance further. And if China is going to be the green country of 2030, I mean, we have to look at how collaborative practices give us a power to go forward. But I think the idea of how the bodies are being measured with urban spaces, I'm working on a project called Brain City San Diego. Once again, it's about bringing the smart people of San Diego with the designers of San Diego and using technologies to measure the body health. I believe, and the way I work is that healthcare is fundamentally the foremost important thing for my approach to architecture. But for me, healthcare is not a typology, but it's a philosophy of how to build. And everything that we do is geared from a health perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you asked the follow-up question about whether the benefits outweigh that. I believe that the benefits of having folks in proximity with one another, having folks of all walks of life having contact with one another, to me, that is far more beneficial than isolating people. So I would always argue for trying to create an environment and the density that makes you run into other people. I mean, I honestly, there are a few folks that are homeless in the city that I know well enough that I recognize them and we chat with each other and greet each other like we're friends. And so to me, that gives me a whole different perspective and a whole different understanding of what their plight might be. It doesn't necessarily give me a solution for that individual. But again, if you're going to really know individuals more and you have kind of folks that you see all the time, that is going to make you behave better. That is going to make you care about those other people. And so you're less likely to do something, even something silly like litter, because you know, okay, we're sharing the same space. And so I think that you can't really remove that from the idea of urban, and no matter how much technology we have, it's never going to replace that.
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think there's a perception of violence and drug use that is worse than the actual statistics. And without getting into politics, because I don't think we're here for that today, San Diego is one of the safest cities year after year, statistically. I think it's the safest time to be a child today, historically. So as a parent, one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of the spaces kids hang out is also the spaces that a lot of the homeless hang out. And so there is that interaction. I've worked in downtown many years, and we do get to know them. I live in North Park, and you know, I walk with my mom, and my mom has been in the suburbs for many years. I grew up in the suburbs, and she says, I'm a little nervous about the homeless people when you're walking with the kids. And I said, no, it's okay, because that's our homeless. You do recognize them, and you do get to know them. So I think there's a stigma about what's dangerous. And, you know, I always struggle with the projects that are architectural will save society in some way. I think, I'll put this in there, but I think social services and things to improve society will do much more than architecture maybe can achieve, you know, one project at a time. But I do think there are incredibly successful examples, including Daniela's Westfield renovation up in UTC, of converting a space that was, I grew up near that mall. I remember it 30 years ago, and it's an incredible space. It's successful in the way that you were saying, the streets in Paris are walkable. And I think that there is a shift in people being so isolated on their phones to having this need to relate and be outside and be around people. So I think that as long as we're cognitive of those things, I think we can continue to create successful spaces.
Just to connect to what you said, again, between many things, I worked for Westfield and was a big part of the UTC remodeling for 5 years actually. But again, those are architects that really wanted to focus on a European street idea, and they really fought for it, even with the community sometimes, till the community realized what they really want to give them. But what I want to say with that's back to also Laura's idea, we need to build communities. And here I'm going back to Mike. Mike is trying to do this here at NewSchool, and he's our mentor for years. Even though I'm from Europe, I learn more from him how to build a community in San Diego. But there is such a resistance. You are part of everything, and still people building this kind of fortresses. Yeah. So we need to break that. That's why we're doing bigger and bigger projects with students and present them to the city, and just to prove it is possible. But we need this kind of architect and this kind of push, you know.
Question from you? Okay.
It's not a question. Well, it's a question. Maybe it's more of a comment. Laura, San Diego State, you probably recognize me anyway from the meetings that we've had before. But anyway, the building at Remington Road and 55th Street, I like the architecture and I like the building. I think San Diego State is doing a great job. Did you design that building?
That was actually, if you're talking about the housing structure, that was actually designed by A.C. Martin.
A.C. Martin.
Yeah, as the architect. Okay. But we hire outside architects to design our buildings.
Oh, but did you design the entrance to San Diego State?
The gateway?
Yes.
That was done by SGPA.
Okay.
So.
Who designed the building at the corner of College and Montezuma Road, the commercial building there with the dorms above, and you've got Trader Joe's there?
Yeah, that was MVEI. They had a different name when they started the project, and I think SGPA was the commercial. They helped us with the commercial space.
Okay. Well, I think in some ways San Diego State is doing a great job of these new buildings that are coming online. I didn't approve of that building. I'm on the council of planning for the college area, and we didn't like the building at all. But anyway, I just wanted to make some comments that I think that new building at 55th in Remington is a nice building, and it blends better than the older building, which is the high-rise, you know which one I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
the South Campus Plaza,
that is not,
Yeah, I think, I mean, we obviously took a very different approach. The South
Yeah.
Campus Plaza was about being on the edge of the campus. It's also, I think, that there are some folks that have changed their minds about that building, actually. But that, you know, it's a matter of scale, and I think it probably was a larger scale than people were ready or used to in that particular neighborhood. I will say that, you know, that a lot of people really love the traditional architecture, Mediterranean, Spanish, whatever you want to call it. That style is not without its controversy. And it wouldn't be right for me to bring up in a discussion about diversity the fact that there are folks that actually have issue with that particular style and what it stands for. So I think that you'd be hard pressed actually to find any architectural style that is completely without controversy. And you know, even modernism has been used by some pretty repressive regimes, so that doesn't even kind of give us an out. But I think it's just interesting to you know, we have to consider that. And so again, that building was one where we did decide to go with the Mission Revival of the Mediterranean style, the 55th and Remington, the new student housing, which I believe has a name now. It's something like Oaxaca. It's not spelled like Oaxaca, and it's pronounced slightly differently, but that's probably about as close as I can get. So
I agree with you. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And again, it's impressive how you're leading and, you know, planning of such a complex campus. And yeah, happy to have you here. So one thing to emphasize as we wrap this up, we're going in the right direction. So we're talking about leaders, women as leaders in architecture, but we already have 3 leaders right here, head of the Department of Neuroscience, facility planning director, her own forum for many, many years. So I think it's happening. We just have to keep doing it and meet and kind of solve more things together, get together basically. And I want to thank you for a very inspiring and very powerful kind of discussion here. And yeah, thank you all for coming and participating, and hope to see you again next time.
So this was much more wonderful I thought it would be as a panel, and especially Laura in charge of San Diego State and the Mission Valley West campus is probably her lifetime achievement when it's all done. So if she's in charge, things will be in good hands.
what campus planner doesn't want to plan a new campus? I mean, that's kind of like a dream, right?
So as usual, we have books to present to all of you. Daniela gets the one called Bad Girls Throughout History. And I think Women in Science belongs to you, Chris. And let's see, the Company of Women, I think this would be for you. The collaboration. And the last one is Women in Design. So thank you so much for coming today. And we'll see you in September.